Imagine running from an empire and ending up trapped between an army and a sea. That is the official definition of "this makes zero sense." And yes, this escalated fast. Israel had just left Egypt. Freedom was fresh. Hope was new. Their backs probably still hurt from years of pyramid-related labor, but at least they were finally walking out. Everything suggested they were heading toward a better life. Until Pharaoh changed his mind. Again. Because of course he did. While Egypt was busy assembling the "Let's Go Bring Them Back" task force, Israel followed a route that confused absolutely everyone. It wasn't the fastest route. It wasn't the safest route. It wasn't even a route. It was more like someone asked, "What's the strangest possible direction?" and then confidently pointed at it. It was the biblical equivalent of choosing "avoid tolls" on your GPS and ending up in a dead-end alley with no signal. Soon the coastline appeared, wide, deep, and extremely in the way. The Red Sea stretched out like a giant reminder that they had reached the end of the map. No hidden path, no convenient bridge, no miracle crossing in progress sign. And behind them, dust rising, chariots approaching, Egyptian armor glinting in the sun like a very shiny, very angry reminder that freedom still wasn't guaranteed. The people instantly panicked. Some screamed, some complained. Most blamed Moses in under half a second. It was impressive, really. A new world record in assigning blame. The crowd surrounded him, talking over one another. "This is it. We're done. Who brings us to a beach in the middle of an escape? Is there another Moses we can talk to?" Moses stayed calm, which only made them more nervous. He stared at the sea the way someone stares at a locked door, hoping it will magically open if they look long enough. Meanwhile, the people did the math. Sea in front, army behind, 0 exits. Negative exits, actually. Someone shouted, "Best route? This wasn't even a route." Another added, "We should have stayed in Egypt. At least the danger there was predictable." The tension climbed. The confusion grew. The dread multiplied. From every angle, the situation looked impossible. And worse, it looked carelessly impossible, as if the plan wasn't just failing, but failing in a strangely intentional way. And that's when the uncomfortable truth settled in. The whole scenario didn't just lack logic. It actively refused to participate in logic. And the worst part? The plan seemed wrong, almost too wrong. If someone had said, "Calm down, the sea is going to open," no one would have believed it. They wouldn't have believed it on a good day, let alone while trapped between an army and an ocean. And Israel certainly didn't believe it now. Moses, however, kept trying. He raised his voice, lifted his hands, and told the people to stay calm. It was a very inspiring speech if you ignored the chariots approaching at full speed. He insisted everything would work out, but the crowd responded with the universal expression of people who do not feel reassured at all. They tried not to freak out, but failing at that came naturally. Some paced, some shouted, some stared at the sea like they were negotiating with it. Others stared at the Egyptian army like they were negotiating with that. Either way, nobody was relaxed. Meanwhile, the Egyptians were reducing the distance with the efficiency of a delivery service that guarantees arrival before sunset. The sound of hooves grew louder. The metallic clatter of chariot wheels echoed across the coastline. Every second turned the situation from bad to "you've got to be kidding." Trying to stay calm in a moment like this was the ancient equivalent of hearing, "Relax, my cousin can fix it," during an actual crisis. Nobody relaxes, nobody believes it, and everyone questions why this cousin has so much alleged power during emergencies. There was no explanation coming, no instructional scroll titled, "How to Survive an Ocean Hours Away from Crushing You," no weather report predicting strong winds and possible water walls later tonight. There was nothing. No strategy that made sense, no terrain advantage, no good timing, no logic that could justify any part of this situation. It was, in every possible layer, a disaster dressed up as an escape route. And it truly was that moment, the moment where even logic appeared to hand in its resignation letter and say, "You're on your own," that the people understood something uncomfortable. The Red Sea wasn't the only problem. Sure, the sea was enormous, cold, and completely uninterested in moving aside. But the real issue was the total lack of any direction to go. There was no plan B, no alternative path, no backup strategy. They weren't stuck. They were blocked from all sides. Forward, sea, backward, empire, sideways, more sea. Emotionally, not great. The pressure tightened. The fear intensified. The options vanished. And it was right there, in that logic-free, panic-heavy gap between despair and disbelief, that something impossible began to happen. The sea opens. It literally opens. No build-up, no warning, no dramatic soundtrack. One moment it is a giant, unhelpful body of water, and the next it is splitting down the middle as if responding to an invisible command. Water lifts straight upward, forming two enormous walls that look like they were installed for a special event no one knew was scheduled. A wide path appears where no path has ever existed. The ground is dry, solid, and shockingly walkable. A powerful wind roars through the corridor, sending waves of sand and noise in every direction. Everything about the moment looks like reality temporarily took a break from following its own rules. People stare, then stare again, then stare a third time because nothing about this makes sense the first two tries. Some extend their hands toward the water, unsure whether touching it is brave or extremely unwise. Others tap their feet on the ground to confirm it is truly dry. The entire nation is doing a collective double-take. It is like seeing an automatic door open, except the door is several kilometers wide, made of water, and currently suspended by nothing. Adults pretend they understand the situation. They absolutely do not. Children, meanwhile, ask all the questions adults are trying to avoid. Why is it standing like that? Is the wind doing it? Where did the water go? Can it fall on us? No adult responds. Everyone simply nods, hoping the kids stop asking. Some people step forward cautiously as if waiting for the miracle to request identification. Others sprint ahead, deciding that if a path appears in the middle of an ocean, you use it without asking too many questions. Progress is messy but enthusiastic. Still, even with a miracle happening in high definition, one problem remains. None of this explains why it is happening like this. There is no announcement, no explanation, and definitely no instructional scroll titled "Crossing the Sea for Beginners." It is magnificent, yes, but not informative. While Israel rushes across, the Egyptians arrive at the edge and, ignoring every instinct for self-preservation, decide to enter the path as well. Chariots roll onto the exposed seabed, horses snort nervously, soldiers shout orders that echo between the water walls. Logic remains missing, probably left the scene entirely. The moment becomes a surreal combination of faith, desperation, and extremely questionable decision-making. Because watching Egypt follow is exactly like trying to copy a trick, when the trick only works for the person who received permission to perform it. And as the crowd realizes both nations are now inside the impossible corridor, something even stranger begins to unfold, because now comes the part that makes the least sense of all. When Egypt tries to copy the miracle, the sea closes. It happens fast. One moment the Egyptian army is confidently charging through the same massive corridor Israel just crossed. The next, the towering walls of water begin to shift, wobble and ripple in ways no water should ever behave. What had looked like a stable passageway now begins to move with a very unfriendly sort of energy. The soldiers don't notice at first. They advance with total confidence, chariots rolling forward, hooves pounding on the seabed, armor clattering in determined rhythm. The army that once dominated nations now races into the heart of an impossible path, convinced they can repeat what they just saw. But the signs are there. A tremor runs across the walls. A deep rumble shakes the ground. The air fills with a pressure that feels like the sea inhaling. A tragedy is quietly forming. It is like trying to repeat a remarkable feat, without realizing that feat was never repeatable in the first place. The Egyptians believe this is strategy. It is not strategy. They believe it might be luck. It is not luck. They hope it might be some rare geological event. It is definitely not geology. Nothing about this is tactical, scientific, or repeatable. The moment they stepped onto that path, the outcome was already set. The soldiers begin to look around. The horses slow down. The walls of water press inward inch by inch, as if the sea is reclaiming what was briefly borrowed. Realization spreads across the ranks with growing discomfort. The great irony of the moment could not be clearer. The strength of Egypt becomes its downfall. The weakness of Israel becomes its escape. Two nations walked into the same miracle, but only one of them walked in with permission. Chariot wheels jam in the mud. Horses panic. The echo of shouted orders bounces between the rising water walls, but nothing can stop what is already unfolding. Egypt is trapped inside a miracle that was never meant for them, and when history is written, Egypt will not mention this part. Not one tablet, not one inscription, not one carefully decorated tomb wall. No museum in the world holds a papyrus that reads, "About the sea, our bad." It is the kind of failure no empire wants to record, let alone explain. Because the truth is simple. This is the kind of disaster that nobody includes in the official history scrolls. And just as the water surges inward, collapsing with unstoppable force, the question hangs in the air, silent, heavy, waiting to be answered. So if none of this makes sense in logic, where does it make sense? The opening of the Red Sea doesn't make sense, because it was never meant to make sense. That is the point. The unusual route, the rising panic, the impossible miracle and the dramatic closing were never designed to fit inside logical categories or tactical explanations. They were designed to stand far outside them. Looking back, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Israel took a strange route, one that no strategist or desert expert would have recommended. It led them straight into a dead end, boxed in by water and an empire. The fear that spread through the camp was real, raw, and overwhelming. And then the miracle arrived, not the tidy, predictable kind, but the kind that flips the world upside down and leaves everyone staring at walls of water, wondering if reality is malfunctioning. And when the crossing ended, the sea closed in a decisive moment that erased Egypt's power but preserved Israel's path. Nothing about any of it fit into human logic, military planning, or natural patterns. It was never supposed to, because some paths only make sense afterward. And sometimes the impossible is the only way to show that logic isn't in charge of everything. The lesson sits right there, hidden inside the chaos. The Red Sea didn't open because it was reasonable. It opened because it had to, not to impress anyone, not to display spectacle, but to make it clear that the escape wasn't Israel's invention, wasn't something they could claim credit for, spin into strategy, or turn into a step-by-step guide. They could not say, "We did it." No general could say, "My plan succeeded." No record keeper could write, "This was our victory." The miracle removed every possibility of ownership. It forced the story to be bigger than logic, bigger than tactics, bigger than human ability. It shaped a narrative that no empire could erase and no historian could twist. The absurdity of the moment explained the purpose of the moment, because sometimes the most confusing route is the one that leads exactly where it needs to go. It is like realizing that the most absurd, winding, unbelievable path was the only one that actually worked. It shouldn't make sense, but that is what makes it undeniable. The Red Sea didn't open because it was logical. It opened because it was necessary, and because no one, not even Israel, could claim, "We made this happen." In the end, that is the whole message. The absurd explains the miracle. And with the sea closed behind them, the dust settling and the impossible still echoing in their memory, the question naturally rises, which impossible moment should be simplified next? The manna, Mount Sinai, or the Jordan River?